Salve Omnes. We're going to get started with Aeneid Book 1, lines 1 through 7, starting right at the beginning of the Aeneid. And in the beginning of any work, you're going to tell your readership what you're going to be talking about. And so in these first 7 lines, very important to the Aeneid because Virgil establishes his themes, he gets us into the epic and lets us know kind of what sort of epic this is going to be. So Arma varumque cano Troiae qui primus aboris Italiam fato profugus lavineque venet litera multe letteris jactatus et alto. Vi superum saevae memorem unones abiram. Multa quoquet bello passus dum conduret urbem, inferitque Deus latio genus unde Latinum, albanique patres ad qualtae moenia Romae. And just from that very first line, Arma varumque cano Troiae qui primus aboris, that rhythm is unmistakable to an ancient. They can easily perceive that that meter is dactylic hexameter, and from that, that puts them into the realm of epic. And of course, the most famous epics from antiquity were Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And there are many ways that Virgil signals that his epic is going to have many, many connections with Homer. And, Homer, of course, wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, both ultimately dealing with the Trojan War. Right in the middle of the first line here, we have Troiae. So we know it's going to be an epic from dactylic hexameter. We know it's going to deal with Troy from Troiae in the beginning. But there are a lot more connections, even in that first line, that establish it. Just looking at the first few words, we've got arma verumque cano, and I sing of arms and the man. And we start with some metonymy there. So arma, arms, is being used to mean war. And specifically the Trojan War, we saw Troiae a little later, and then the last half of the Aeneid is going to deal with the war in Latium, where Aeneas has to defeat Turnus and establish basically a new Trojan state in Italy. And then Virum is standing for Aeneas in the Aeneid, but to this we can definitely compare the beginning of Homer's Odyssey. Andra moyene musa polutropon hosmalapola plangthea petroies hieron toliethron eperse. And Homer there is starting off his Odyssey with, O Muse, tell me of the man of many wiles, etc., etc. So we've got both the man as the first word. It's the second word in Virgil's Aeneid. You can see down in the second line, the name of Troy crops up. So a lot of connections with the Odyssey in particular. And with those as well, there is something super fancy going on, since he mentioned Arma, which we said could be a metonymy for war, and Virum, which is going to be about Aeneas as a man and his journeys and his sufferings. And so the arms are basically talking about war, which the books 7 through 12 of the Aeneid, the last half of the Aeneid, really all deal with the war for Latium. The first 6 books all deal with Aeneas and his journey to Italy. And so you've got the arms going with the end, the very first word going with the end of the Aeneid, the second word going with essentially the first half of the Aeneid. So these words and the Aeneid as a whole form this enormous chiasmus, which you'll remember as ABBA word order. And this may seem sort of too fanciful or fantastic to believe, but Virgil spent a lot of time working on the Aeneid and building in many, many structural references. We're even told that before he created the Aeneid in poetry, he had actually written out the entire thing in a prose version. None of that survives. We don't know for certain that that is the truth, but that is what we are told. So these things that seem a bit incredible or sometimes just too clever and just classicists over hundreds of years with too much time on their hands make stuff up. There might be some of that, but this one I think is for real. All right, so back to the whole poem. I've put in yellow highlight here everything in the nominative, and this is all going to be words that directly are connected to Aeneas. So, qui primus, profugus, ille, jactatus, passus, throughout. So, all of that is linking back to the qui, which itself is picking up the virum. So, I sing of arms and the man who first Troia ab oris, from the shores of Troy. This is poetry, and so word order is going to be pretty free. So I've tried to mark some of those things for you. So who first from the shores of Troy. And now in English, we like to have a verb. Romans keep their verbs usually till the end, but we like to have it now. So who first from the shores of Troy, Wainit, came Italiam, to Italy. In poetry, prepositions, particular prepositions dealing with direction, are optional at best. So here, just the accusative Italiam is plenty to tell you to Italy. So who first from the shores of Troy came to Italy? Profugus fato, having been exiled or just an exile by fate. Que and Lavinia litera. So to the Lavinian shores, and that's essentially a specific part of Italy. Leaving this litera off until the beginning of the next line has a name. Everything's got a name. This is called enjambment. Now, you may have heard me pronounce Lavinia, and what you might think should be pronounced Lavinia. But in the meter, to make it work, we've got to essentially squeeze that IA together. And this is something called synesesis. So, Laviniaque Wainit, as it says down here, you pronounce that Laviniaque and not Laviniaque. Otherwise, you wind up with too many syllables. All right. Multileteris jactatus et alto. So remember that and im at the end of a word effectively act like a vowel, and so that aligns with the following either. So multil, and then final vowels also allied. So you get two in a row. Multileteris jactatus et alto. So having been tossed, multum, a lot, and the ille, sorry, I should have started with that. So he, having been tossed a lot. Et. On the AP, if you have an et like this, they need both and, right? So even though in English and in perfectly acceptable translation, we might leave out the both. When you're doing a literal AP translation, that might be the difference in getting the point and not getting the point. So et, both and. So he, having been tossed much, both on land and on the deep meaning the sea, and so here an example of metonymy. We superum, by the force of the gods, and remember, very, very common in poetry that a final on a second declension noun or adjective can actually be the genitive plural, so orum. And we see that by itself, in the third declension. So regum of the kings, but superum is the same as superorum. So by the power of the gods. Saiwai memorem eunonis ab iram. All right, get ready. These 5 words are a tour de force. So when we match up the cases, we see that iram, the accusative, if we find an adjective for that, that's memorem. So both of those have to be the accusative. Saiwai in the genitive has got to link up with the eunonis. So saiwai eunonis, those go together. Memorem iram, those go together. That kind of word order that interlocks like that has a name, synthesis. So we've got some synthesis going on there. And now in terms of what it means, ob, remember not ob, but ob, on account of the memorem iram, the mindful wrath. The wrath that remembers, the wrath that holds a grudge of Saiwai Eunonis, of savage, fierce Juno. So all of that together on account of the mindful wrath of savage Juno. And so here, because the wrath is experiencing a human trait, wrath itself having a memory, is an example of personification. It's a non-human thing. It's just sort of an idea, wrath, and yet here it's the wrath itself holding a grudge. And then, but we know, of course, it's Juno who is the goddess who holds a grudge about things. And so even though the memorim should more properly go with Eunonis, it has been transferred over to the Iram, and that's for poetic effect, and it kind of stops you in your tracks. It's a bit striking. That kind of transferred epithet is called enalage, and that's the kind of thing that Virgil really enjoys. So just that little group there, a lot of stuff going on in line 4. Multa quoquet bello passus dum conduret orbem. So passus, again, still going back to the qui, talking about Aeneas. Having suffered, that's the perfect participle. It's a deponent verb, patior. Having suffered many things. Quoquet, well, we got the elision. Also, this quoquet and also, a little bit redundant, but again, if you're doing a literal AP translation, if he's got 2 words for and, figure out a way to render that. So maybe and also having suffered many things in war. So as far as is it in war, from war, etc., use context. If you have an ablative without a preposition, just a little reminder, you can start with fwib. And so fwib, from, with, in, by, and one of those will usually get you where you want to be. Dum conduret orbem infereque deos latio. So you've got dum, which can mean while, but here, notice the conduret, you got an infinitive plus an ending, so an imperfect subjunctive. Same thing with the inferet. And dum plus the subjunctive has a special meaning, until. So until he founded the city and brought his gods to Latium. This is usually labeled a dative of direction. All right, fine. Genus unde Latinum albanique patres atque altae mornia Romae. So you might notice that what's missing from the genus down to the end there is a verb. So no verb to be had. And usually when that's the case, you simply supply the appropriate form of to be, or something that gets that same sort of sense across. So unde, from whence, there is, there exists, there arose. The genus Latinum, the Latin race. Albanique patres, the Alban fathers. They're not Albanian, they're Alban. So the Alban fathers. And the high walls of Rome, right? No, not right, because Altai can't go with Moenia. Altai has to go with Romae. So, and the walls of High Rome. So another example of enalage where Virgil has chosen to transfer the epithet. All right, so we are 7 lines in. We're on our way. Started with the Aeneid. Look through the playlist, and you can hopefully get all the way through the list eventually. All right, thanks.